So, in Starship Troopers, the film we all just experienced, essentially answers the question, what would it be like to live in an insane fascist country? And the answer is pretty cool. Pretty, I mean, aside from the near certainty that you will die in an incredibly gruesome way for an essentially meaningless reason.
Well, that's if you become a citizen. If you're smart, you just hang out on Earth.
What, and get killed by bug meteors? I say no thank you to that. I'm joining up.
Highly unlikely. One city out of all of them. Come on. Roll the dice.
Yeah, if you were Rigo in this movie, your dad would have said, why don't you go on a nice vacation? Hey. And you would have said, okay, sure. And that would have been the end of the film.
Well, no, but then you would have been wiped out because they make a point of telling you that, like, Dagobah Beach gets wiped out by the bugs.
Dagobah
Beach. What?
The way he says that, you just wonder what the hell's going on Dagobah Beach.
Yeah,
I think they have those three-titty mutants from Total Recall in there.
Yeah, maybe you wouldn't list if you heard
Beach.
Ibiza was wiped out by the bugs.
So, I mean, what we see, this movie came out in 1997 and really...
Yeah, when everything was going great.
Yeah, and that's why basically nobody knew what to make of this movie at the time. But I would submit to you that all of Verhoeven's like major Hollywood science fiction films, Robocop, Total Recall, and especially Starship Troopers, were all about 20 years ahead of their time when they came out. So luckily, we are now living exactly 20 years in the future from Starship Troopers at a time when our reality has caught up to the reality of the film.
Yes.
So like, let's discuss some of the ways in which this movie holds up, not just holds up, but matures and essentially becomes more meaningful with time. And I'll start right off the bat. How much better does this movie seem, or like how much more does it make sense living in America after 9/11 and the Iraq War?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's uncanny. Basically everything from the meteor hitting Buenos Aires onward is just the story of 9/11 and the media response to it just in real time.
And I always think of the scene when they're...
Although I will point out that bug fuel cannot melt steel beams, so...
I always think of the scene right before they're starting the invasion of Clandathu, where the Admiral says, "That's bug plasma. Our intelligence shows it should be random and scattered." And then they just start like just wiping out ship after ship, and they goes, "This isn't random. Somebody made a big mistake."
Yeah, well, you go to the war with the army you have.
And then there's that like sort of Colin Powell at the UN scene where they're like, you know, they're stepping down and taking responsibility, except that never happened. Well, another example of how this is a better society to live in.
Yeah, exactly. The Sky Marshal has to resign when he fucks up a war.
But what else do we see about like essentially what is so good and perfect about the Starship Trooper society? I mean, it's post-gender.
That's true. Yes. Yeah, yes. No one has any gender hang-ups anymore. That's cool.
It's post-racial as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like everything looks very clean. Like I said, they made football way more exciting by putting it indoors and shrinking the field to about 20 yards. More offense. That's good.
I also, because it's a Paul Verhoeven movie, of course, you're going to get a ton of gore, but also a lot of gratuitous nudity as well.
Yeah.
It really is the auteur of gratuitous sex and violence.
Yes.
Which is probably why we like him so much. But it's
because it's art.
Well, it's art in that he pushes it so far past it being gratuitous that in fact it becomes art.
Yeah,
and
that's the point.
In this movie in particular, think of like all of the painstaking model creation that went into, which would actually never ever happen in a movie nowadays. Nobody would go through the trouble of over and over again creating dozens of incredibly lifelike corpses that are just ripped to shreds.
Yeah.
And showing you that over and over again in a movie that's essentially supposed to be like a feel-good, like you're rooting for these hot teens to fight a war, but he can't help just keep showing you, oh no, this is actually what the movie is about.
Yeah.
Which is just the totally senseless and loss of human life in a fascist society.
Right. But it's cool. That's the thing. And that's the real genius of this movie, I think, is that I think it's the only movie that I'm aware of that attempts to criticize fascism and militarized society by, instead of making a movie about one of those societies, trying to make a movie created by that society.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing about this movie is you're not supposed to think of this movie as some 20th century American Hollywood film that's about a fantasy future. This is a movie created by that society. This is an artifact from the future beamed back to us. This is what they would make. This is the kind of art they would make. And that's where the critique is, because a lot of it is terrible on purpose. And that is the thing that makes Verhoeven so fearless, is that he is willing to allow the audience and critics not only to misinterpret him and say that he's a fascist, which a lot of them did, but even more terrifying, to think that he's a shitty filmmaker, which is the worst fear any director can have, and yet he's willing to just fill the screen for half of the running time with these close-ups of these just blank, expressionless faces, these absolutely vacuous, slack-jawed teens looking dumber than Werner Herzog's chickens and just saying, "I love you, Johnny." And he's willing to put that on screen and willing to risk ridicule and people saying, "Wow, this is some cheesy bullshit," in the service of presenting a thoroughgoing critique and analysis of what fascist culture creates. He says, this is what it would be, and this is what we know for a fact Goebbels preferred when the Nazis were making films. Not heavy propaganda movies that front-loaded the ideology, light entertainments where it's a frothy romance with and then all of the fascist values are just sort of assumed throughout instead of put forward. And he was like, yeah, this is what they would make. And if it feels sterile and empty and horrible, then that should tell you something. And the degree to which the culture that you find in your society mirrors it is the degree that you should be pretty fucking concerned.
Exactly. This is the film of like how a fascist society sees itself, like either from the future or like this is the movie these are the movies we'd all be watching if the Nazis had won the war.
Yes, exactly.
Or like essentially like you could imagine the characters in this film as a stand-in for like how young people in Germany saw themselves at the dawn of World War II.
Yeah.
And Verhoeven grew up in Holland under Nazi occupation when he was around like 6, 7, 8. So like during his
They had a fucking V2 pad in his backyard, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I think might be an apocryphal story, but I remember reading somewhere that, the Nazis set up a V2 rocket platform and essentially in his backyard to launch rockets at London.
Yeah.
So, like, that obviously is suffused in all of his films, like this vision of fascism and, quite frankly, American society as, like, the Fourth Reich.
Yeah.
But also, like, it's undeniable that he's also kind of turned on by all of it.
Oh, yeah, and yeah.
And I think, like, again, in this, like, portraying how, like, a fascist society views itself, it shows that, like, for the people involved in it, it's fun and cool.
Yeah.
Up until the point that, like, you're all dying in, a frozen Russian winter.
But that's more of the seduction, because yes, he shows the emotional emptiness at the heart of it, but he also shows what's enticing, and it's not just the myths that they tell themselves and the ideology of supremacy and bravery and all that, but also the aesthetic thrill of all of the blood and guts. I mean, until it happens specifically to you, it will always be aesthetically thrilling to see that happen. So that's why this can be conceived of as a film by this society, even though it includes all of this really brutal violence, because I think it was Truffaut who said that there's no such thing as an anti-war movie, because the presentation of warfare is inherently thrilling in a way that entices people to want to engage in it. And it's the same thing here. You know, the guts, they're horrible, but they're not yours. And it still presents it as an adventure until you yourself get ground up by it.
Well, would a society that just went through this huge convulsion of really horrifying violence, would it actually want its cinema to reflect that? Would it want it to be gory? Or would they just want to kind of forget about it?
Forget, what do you mean, went through what? This
through what?
This is generation. This is like hundreds of years after whatever fascist takeover occurred.
Well, this is presumably after the events depicted in the movie, the destruction of Buenos Aires.
Well, you
and
don't
the
know that
massacre at
actually happened
Bathu.
in the society.
Oh, you're saying that this is all fictional and that this could just very well be the peacetime society, the utopian ideal.
Yeah, you don't know. But even if it isn't, there were war movies throughout there were war movies made by every society in war in the 20th century.
Sure, yeah.
I mean that's still a component of building esprit de corps and morale is presenting warfare, even if it's horrible, it is a thing you come out the other end as a better person, and that's what they're telling you.
So we talked about how the gratuitous violence in this movie is sort of the point of it, in that it is like you could make it through probably 3/4 of that movie and like just be like, this is a fun action movie, and then Doogie Howser shows up dressed like an SS officer. And like at some point, even if you're really not getting it, something has to click there.
A telepathic SS officer. Thank you very much.
And gratuitous violence like is the point in Verhoeven's movies, but like he's also known for gratuitous sex. And I want to make a point of talking about a couple of the scenes in this movie. The first of which is the shower scene in Basic Training, which again. It underscores, again, a sort of a society that's post-gender, in that it's this unisex bathroom, and everyone's getting naked, everyone's showering together, and
there are no bathroom sickos
yeah.
in the Federal Republic.
Everyone is comfortable in a unisex bathroom, everyone is equal, but like at the same time, these are all these hot young people who are naked together, and I think in the DVD commentary to this movie, Verhoeven talks about how this scene in particular underscores for him like the fascist ideology of the universe he's portraying, in that like these are all hot young people, but they're all so brainwashed by the state that they're not even distracted by being horny at all. They're not even distracted by all of the hot naked bodies around them because they're just too hyped up about citizenship and service. And being part of this great body politic. Like, again, your own individual body and those around you sort of disappear as part of this grand fascist body.
That's how I felt about AP government classes.
The second scene I want to talk about is the administrative punishment scene where Johnny Rico gets whipped publicly. And I got to say, I wish he hadn't included that because it's just too hot. Yeah. It's too hot. I had to walk out of the theater for that one. I don't know how you guys made it through that scene where they stick the bite in his mouth and Clancy Brown goes, "Chomp down on this, son. It helps. I know." And then finally, the movie is based around a love triangle, and the scene where Dizzy is thirsty for Johnny Rico, like the whole movie, to an annoying degree. And the scene where they finally hook up, I think it's very important to note that Johnny has to basically be ordered by his commanding officer to fulfill this romantic potential.
You hit those back walls, Corporal. That's an order.
Permission to be horny, sir. Permission granted. And they only are allowed to consummate this relationship as like a reward for being blooded in combat together. But before then, he shows no interest in her at all until Michael Ironside literally orders him to be attracted to her.
He doesn't do anything of his own volition in this movie. So he goes into the army because of Carmen, and then he stays in there because his family gets killed. And then he goes with Desi because Michael Ironsides orders him to. He kills Michael Ironsides because he orders him to. He goes down the right tunnel because Doogie Howser telepathically put it into his brain. And then at the end of the movie, his entire vocabulary is just the shit that Michael Ironside told him. So it's a process by which everything has been whittled down to just this nub of stimulus response and taking orders.
I want to just real briefly, the scene with Michael Ironside where he dies, we see earlier he kills one of his own soldiers and he goes, "I'd expect anyone in this unit to do the same for me." And then his legs get ripped off as he gets sucked into the bug hole. And he says to Johnny Rico, "You know what to do." And every time I see this movie, I remember again like, there's a very good chance he could have lived through those injuries.
Yeah, they already showed a guy with no legs at the recruiting station. There's no way. I mean, maybe he didn't want to live that way.
they could have easily just dragged him.
Also, he could have shot that fucking bug too. He had the high-powered sniper rifle, and the bug's about to kill him. Why don't you shoot the bug? Good Lord.
Do not question Lieutenant Ratchet.
Yeah, he's
Rat
a rat.
checks
He's
roughnecks. Ooh-ah.
more like Lieutenant Ratchet. He's a ratchet hoe.
So I talked in the beginning about how, like as Matt said, Verhoeven is brave enough to like be thought of as a bad filmmaker.
Yeah.
And in doing so, like think how brilliant a director you have to be to get intentionally bad performances from your actors in exactly the right way, not just as an accident, but to consciously do it. And it's, again, like he does this also in Showgirls, probably most famously, like what this movie is to military violence, Showgirls is to like sex and pornography and consumerism in American culture. And like the Elizabeth Berkley performance in that. Like there are actors that are in on the joke and not in on it. Like Gina Gershon, Crystal Connors, and then is in on the joke. Elizabeth Berkley isn't. Who do we think in this movie? Obviously Casper Van Dien, number one most not in on the joke person in this movie.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is he knew what to do, and what he did was he basically drafted people from primetime soap operas or kid shows, and he like Saved by the Bell or Melrose Place or whatever, and he just figured that. I'm assuming he just figured that these guys are who they seem to be on the surface, since they've never shown any evidence of anything deeper than that.
Neil Patrick Harris is certainly in on the joke, but he's obviously a very smart guy. But it's irrelevant because he would have played it the same way, either way, I think.
And I gotta say, and sort of rewatching it again, I'd like to give some props to Jake Busey for probably being in on the joke too. I love some Jake Busey.
Oh yeah,
and I love those big baseball card-sized teeth. What happened to Jake Busey? He was amazing in this movie, and Peter Jackson's like first or second American movie, The Frighteners.
Yeah, Contact too, where he's the crazy preacher.
Oh right, we need more Jake Busey. If any of you are casting agents in the audience tonight, we'd like to see more Jake Busey. If you're Jake Busey, please just actually stand up and be recognized for your work. All right, so. Let's go. Virgil, what's your favorite scene in Starship Troopers?
I got to think about it. Can we get back to me?
God damn it!
What? Why? What? You just know instantly? You have to contemplate it, roll back all the scenes in your head.
Matt, what's the scene that stands out for you in Starship Troopers, Matt?
Well, it's always
a different question.
It's always tough. It's always tough to pick one. It's such a comprehensively enjoyable film, but
for me, Senator Filibuster.
The film the scene that is the apotheosis of his entire critique of fascist culture and ideology is at the end, after they've captured the brain bug, because as we said, the movie dissects in many ways the way that fascist culture is produced and replicates itself, but it also, by doing that, shows a lot of the subterranean urges that are at the heart of fascism, namely a deep masculine anxiety about female sexuality, and we get a fantastic punchline to that, which is sort of layered in the movie, but very subtly, until that moment when the scientist takes the giant wrench thing and plunges it into the incredibly vaginal mouth of the brain bug, and then they put the fucking sensor thing on top of it. That's the brilliant point of that, is that if he just sticks it in the hole, that's one thing. But to put a bow on the symbolism of it, because you might not even have thought that was a vagina, but then when they put the sensor thing on it, that gives it like a sexual connotation that is not necessarily intended by the federal network or whatever, but just by virtue of what they want to not show you, it makes you think, well, why are they not showing it to me? And then you're like, oh right, his mouth is a giant vagina, and they went down into the bug holes to pull it out. I mean, it's all in there sort of as allegory until that moment. So I really like that.
If you come up with anything yet, Virgil?
Yes, I have come up with something.
Okay.
Thank you. I would say, and not just a scene, but a sequence, the basic training sequence always stuck out to me. And I'm thinking back to when I first saw this film, probably, I didn't see it in theaters, so I probably saw it on television maybe like 10, 15 years or so ago. And that was when the drill instructor first just starts wrestling with someone. Just says, okay, here's a spiel. Anyone want to fight me right now? And then just breaks his fucking arm. But especially the part where he flings the knife into the hand, which made me realize, oh, this isn't, they can do that in this world. Like, that's totally okay there. Here, if you're a drill instructor and you slap someone, you're not allowed to do that.
And they take it for granted. I will say that I actually caught something here that I think I forgot from because I saw it as a kid. I actually don't even remember if I saw it in a theater, but I've seen it a million times since then, but always on television, always on a relatively small screen, not necessarily always in high definition. And one thing that I don't remember noticing until this time is that after Des gets choked out by Clancy Brown, the next scene she tries to sit next to Rico in the chow line, and she has a giant purple bruise on her neck that's not mentioned. And I thought that was hilarious. You get just destroyed in this thing.
And then you're up to the point of dying.
Yeah. And
this to me says, okay, this is just us telling you that you are totally expendable, that we have to get rid of any concept of individualism or self-preservation.
Well, and what I like so much about that is that it like the conceit that we're supposed to care about these characters and this like love triangle between Johnny Rico and these two girls, or the people you meet in boot camp, and then they all feel like the dumb farm guy, the wise guy, like the conceit of that is so brutally like ripped from you by like when they give you like 300,000 dead in an hour, and it just again like underscoring just the totally senseless mass death that undergirds, like I said, this sort of high school romance between these rather dumb teenagers.
So your superior officers are just brutalizing you pretty much for fun or to make a sarcastic comment at your expense, at the expense of your physical well-being. But these cadets are still trying to oppress them, still angling for their approval.
Well, Clancy Brown, great character actor, drill instructor Zim, he was tough on them because he needed to be tough on them so he could be the guy that captured the brain bug at the end.
Drill instructor Howard Zinn.
He would have taken the bug side, let's be honest.
I want to talk about one more thing in this movie in terms of like not just how well it holds up living in America after 9/11 and fucking the war in Iraq. And now, of course, a society president that seems to, have a fash tendency, shall we say, or at least among his supporters. I want to talk about like the movie itself just as a spectacle and an action movie. Holds up incredibly well now, 20 years old. All of the special effects look phenomenal, and I would say better than most of the
Absolutely. I mean, there's not that much CGI in it compared to movies nowadays, and it's better than anything in fucking The Crimes of Ernie Keebler or whatever the fuck that Harry Potter movie is. I guarantee goddamn to you that. And then in addition to that, there's a ton of practical effects. Not only is all the blood real, which is, for me, the sine qua non of a good action movie. They're
actually bleeding in the film.
Yeah, well, ideally. But I mean, just that it's practical blood. It's Caro syrup or whatever. If you CGI blood and fire, those are the things that are the least accurately rendered in CG. Every movie where they're just, oh yeah, we'll kill 50 people, but we'll just have a little stupid, CGI thing come out of their chest. Awful, dog shit, and they infuriate me.
No, yeah, CGI blood it's just lazy. It's just we don't want to change the.
Yeah, you don't want to strap squibs to a guy and have a bunch of things
and not just. I mean,
off.
like the probably one of our favorite Paul Verhoeven scenes, which he's not in this movie, but the scene in Robocop.
Hell yes.
In the unrated version, the scene in the boardroom where the Ed 209 shoots that guy goes on for like 20 seconds.
Oh God.
Of that guy just getting getting blown apart.
And the thing is, people say, and that's actually a perfect example for people who want to dismiss this stuff as totally gratuitous, as opposed to every part of this having a point. And the point of that is that there's a punchline in that scene that works way better in the unrated version when they strafe his body for 30 seconds than it still works in the theatrical version because the squibs are just so huge. But after he's been shot and then they show him getting strafed, there's a scene, as soon as the gun stops, somebody else yells, "Somebody call a goddamn paramedic." And after that, it's funnier. So it's literally not gratuitous because it's setting up a very funny joke.
But he uses CGI in a way that like the bugs themselves look as good as any CGI creation in a movie now, 20 years later. And overall, the movie looks 1,000 times better than any of like Marvel movie or anything like that.
Well, part of it is that yes, they have CGI, but even with the stuff that now would all be CGI, like spaceships or whatever, they throw in some stop motion and miniatures,
Absolutely.
which give it makes it less totalizing. It makes it harder to sort of glaze over, which is I think what happens with all CGI movies.
It's a blend of both, and even if he's using CGI, Verhoeven, he wants to get those actors covered in goop. He wants to goop.
Yeah, you
them
gotta
up.
get
up in the
goop.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's two things about his choice not to use a CGI. Well, I mean, honestly, because probably it was prohibitively expensive at this point, and probably still at that point easier, cheaper to do things with miniatures. But using the miniatures underscores two things. And one is just the design of the ships, these blocky Lego designs, which is very kind of fascist type design, right?
Yeah.
And then the other is that the actual things that happen, like if you were to put this to paper and read the script, you'd think that's pretty fucking stupid. If everything is just a big CGI soupy monstrosity, it's probably too easy for the audience to just take that seriously and just accept all of it as it's happening. It being miniatures kind of underscores how ludicrous it is.
Yeah, like think how jarring it would be in like a Marvel superhero movie, or like even like one of the R-rated ones, to just like cut away to like an actually physically recreated human skull getting split in half, like he shows you it dozens of times in this movie.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's R though. They don't do those.
Yeah. So what do we think? Starship Troopers, very good society to live in, or in fact the perfect society to live in, and one of which we should all consider, doing our part to create.
I gotta tell you, I spent the whole movie looking for any kind of flaws, and I came up short. It looks awesome.
Here's one thing that's interesting about it. Okay, there's no gender in the film. There's no race in the film. Though, interestingly, everyone's Latino, and I didn't realize that was the utopian ideal. But thinking about it, yeah, kind of, yeah, I'm with that. But one thing that does absolutely still exist is class in this society.
Well, yeah, Johnny Rico's rich.
He's upper class, and his parents are cuck libs, basically.
Yeah.
Who don't want him to enlist, and I don't want you to be a citizen.
And that is actually another insightful element of fascism, is that it maintains class, obviously, because it's a service of capital, but it also maintains class resentment as sort of an engine of social cohesion. So you're still supposed to sort of resent rich people even as they are largely the beneficiaries of the social order. The best moment for that is a scene after you see that Johnny Rico got a 35% on his math test. His dad says, "You're going to Harvard," and that's it.
And also, like Johnny Rico, he has like his parents are not citizens, but they're able to have children because presumably they paid.
You got to figure that
you got to like sort of pay money.
Yeah.
So if you join the Citizenship cast, you can you get a GI Bill, you get a college education, probably enough money to buy a car, and that's it. And you can vote.
And you can vote. Yeah. That's about it. And you get to be a sky marshal. Doesn't that sound fun?
Aren't those luggage handlers at the airport what they call them?
You get to smoke in the Delta VIP lounge.
No, you don't.
So, I mean, I guess just to close things out here, again, this is, as we said, a film that a fascist society would make about itself. So just think of what it was like to see this movie in 1997, and think how much more like the society you currently live in it seems like in 2018.
Yeah,
and just how genuinely more appropriate this movie gets with every passing year.
In fact, we're so close to it that this sort of film is now impossible to make because the satirical angle comes from playing with the veneer that separates the real, social order, and we're vastly approaching that 0 point where there's no difference, which means there's no place to do satire.
There is a place, friend. It's called podcasts. And it was not predicted by this film.
I just have two things. These are miscellaneous notes I just want to say. One, this isn't related to this, but just Verhoeven in general. We talked about how he grew up in a Nazi-occupied Holland and how that shaped his life, and all of his movies are dealing with that reality in some way or another. And if I ever interviewed him, the one question I would really want to ask him is, how much sick pleasure did you get from using, as your leading man in a few of your biggest movies, a Aryan Superman who was literally the son of a Nazi police officer in Arnold Schwarzenegger? Like, he must have just gotten a kick out of that in a really perverted way. And the other is that I think we need to all give some major props to one of the most underappreciated film contributors of the 90s and 80s, Ed Neumeyer, who amazingly only wrote Robocop and Starship Troopers. Those are the only theatrical films he made. He wrote. And then he wrote the sequels, including the straight-to-DVD sequels to this, and he directed a few of them too. But that's the only
those worth seeing?
No, they're terrible. Okay. But I just think that's like 2 for 2, man. Way to go.
Okay, I think we have time for a couple questions. If we want to move on to the Q&A portion of, is there a mic that we can pass around?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see here. This guy in the front here.
Yeah, he got it up real quick.
Yeah.
You shouldn't reward them for being too thirsty.
Well, it's just because, Matt, you mentioned it just a second ago, and it reminded me of my question, which was, you said that this movie couldn't be made right now because the satire is too close to reality. And I think that's like just true in general. And so my question is, if somebody did want to really parody or satire the actual like fascist undertones that are happening in America right now, would it be better to go the overt route, or I mean, like, think about things like what Colbert did, where so many people were actually convinced that they were on his side, but it also was like actually like good praxis in a lot of ways. He was able to make some change. Like, do you go for the like you were saying it before, Will? Like, is the better way to do it to sort of agree and then show the logical conclusion, or to just be more overt?
Just like for me, like my personal taste, like I would prefer a satire that, that essentially portrays what it's satirizing, but like to a ludicrous degree, as this movie does. And I would say, if I were making a movie that attempted to do the same thing here in our current day, you would simply have to run the risk that you would inadvertently make a wonderful fascist propaganda movie by being too good at essentially mimicking the insane ideology and personalities of what you're portraying.
My instinct, and I haven't thought about it too much, but my instinct is that what I would want to do, and I would like to see done, although I don't know how it would work in practice, is something that took the gratuitous part and put that into sort of an overdrive. Just went grotesque to the point of nausea, sort of a sallow type inspiration. That's what I think like actual shit, like just blood everywhere, but no coherent plot at all, and not any characters with differentiated identities or even names. Just sort of a nameless procession of bodily violation. If there's anybody in the theater who made it to the end at the premiere, you fucked up, basically. If everyone hasn't walked out, you didn't do a good enough job. That would be my instinct.
All right, next question. Let's see. I'll go with guy in the back there in the flannel shirt.
Verhoeven's, he's in on it because he has Jake Busey play Dixie on the fiddle. But my question is, don't you guys think that towards the end where they've captured the brain bug and they say, oh, it feels fear and everybody cheers. That's of course classic fascism as well.
That was a comment, sir. Get the fuck out of here. I forgot to fucking warn people. No goddamn comments.
This is fascism right now.
All right, and if you raise your hand, you better have a goddamn question.
Okay, jawohl, Matt Christman. Okay, how about blue shirt back there?
So my question is regarding how even in 1997 they managed to completely lampoon conservatives in the debate portion, and I'm not old enough to know this, but I guess in the follow-up and lead-up to the first Gulf War, it was similar, but it just seems so insane that you have a bow tie wearing conservative just spouting lunacy, and I'm wondering if that was like a common occurrence then, or he was just predicting the future perfectly.
I mean, that is one of the most just strictly prescient things in the movie because, yeah, the talking heads yelling at each other thing didn't really come into being until the 21st century. I mean, Fox News, I think this came out the year Fox News was launched or a year before. That model didn't really exist.
I think you had Crossfire since the 80s. McLaughlin Group, obviously.
But I think more importantly is that that's the only little sliver we get of the discourse that this culture has, and I think it's a good insight that even in a world that is clearly sort of this dictatorship of military officers, there is still going to be idiots yelling at each other about the news of the day to simulate like debate and to simulate a public sphere, the public space. That's always going to have to be there, even if the content is completely null. And I think anybody who watches news arguments can see how little actual ideological difference is involved and how low the stakes are.
But also just like the way he anticipated the...
Sorry, guys, my throat is fucked up.
The essential shittiness and cheapness of the graphics packages of cable news as it covers wars, like with like the big flashing graphics and things like that. And then I do want to acknowledge, even though it was a comment, I did notice actually, I think for the first time watching it now, that Jake Busey does in fact fiddle Dixie on his electronic fiddle. So another tell there. And can we get a shout out for a small part by Dean Norris? Dean Norris.
I believe he was 25 years old when they shot this.
Okay, another question. Okay, how about this guy right in the front here?
Hey, so satire always has to have a clarity of purpose, or you risk inadvertently promoting the thing that you're trying to parody. So do you think that it's ever been taken, stuff like this, like Starship Troopers and Robocop, they've ever been like misinterpreted as promotions for this kind of fascism, what do you think of like the general threat of this type of satire inadvertently promoting this type of ideology when it's like distributed?
Well, I mean, I think the answer is almost certainly. Anytime you make like a big Hollywood action, spectacle like this, and it may even be like that's the majority of the way this movie was initially received by an audience. However, I guess like I would slightly disagree with the idea that like satire has to have a clarity of purpose. I think satire can just be satire, and essentially when you do something like this, you're always running a risk of it. And I guess I would prefer to live in a world where you can do that, or that satire can exist for the sake of itself, or that you can just be absurd or show something as absurd, even if you're running the risk of it being misinterpreted, which is, I think, always inherent in any satirical endeavor.
And I'd also wager to bet that way more people signed up to join the Army after watching Platoon or Full Metal Jacket than Starship Troopers.
That's a good point, probably. All right, like two more questions. Okay, this guy here.
So on the, I guess the topic of Verhoeven, so I tried to watch Basic Instinct the other night, and I just couldn't finish it. It was too risque. I got too horny. It was. But my question is, like, where do you think that kind of fits into his work in terms of, critiquing our society? Yeah.
Well, like in the Joe Esterhaus films, Basic Instinct and Showgirls, those are probably like his least celebrated and most reviled movies as an American director.
Yeah.
Because they were about sex and not violence. And I think, ultimately, whether it is sex or violence, I think his movies are intentionally about showing and sort of like making the audience implicit in the sort of trashiness and cheapness of human life, be it in a military or a violent sense, or even in a sexual one.
Yeah, the culture sort of commodifying the human sensations and the human body itself. And I do think, that there's two reasons that those movies have worse reputations. One is that Joe Esterhaus is as dumb as a Paul Verhoeven character, and that works in the sense that he can sort of mold. He can take this like direct, lizard-brained output from this guy and sort of put it on screen in a way that illustrates sort of what he's probably not even aware of. But the other is that Americans, not just the mass audience, not just the Puritans, but even film critics are much more comfortable with films that are explicit in their violence than in sexuality.
Okay, last question. Okay, all right, right there.
Yeah, so I hadn't seen this in a while, and I remember, wow, this is really loud. I remember that the sort of federal news segments throughout it sort of were the obvious giveaway that it was satire. Sorry, is this sounding terrible up where you are?
No, I can hear you.
Okay, good. And in light of sort of Matt's idea of just the kind of unrestrained blood and guts spectacle, like, I wonder, do you think the movie would work if you cut out the little federal news segments and it was otherwise exactly the same? Like, do you think the satire would come through at all?
I think it would, but it would be more muted, because I think like those, like the news segments are like the biggest laugh lines, or like they break up the movie in a way that like sort of takes you out of the narrative and puts you into this self-consciously ridiculous sort of bookends to each of these segments.
I think it's a necessary framing device, and as well a necessary distancing device.
And also, it's really the only insight you get into the culture more broadly beyond the lives of the characters in the film. It gives you it gives you insight into the architecture that they're part of more than you get just from context.
Right, and I guess finally, again, in his attention to detail and gratuitous violence, here's one thing that I noticed, again, watching this movie now. Right after Buenos Aires is destroyed and you see like the footage of like the ruined cities, right before they talk to an angry man on the street, he shows you a crushed dog. Yeah. He shows you a dead dog.
Because he knows that even in the future fascist world, humans are way more sentimental towards animals than they are to people.
So, closing thoughts, gentlemen, on Starship Troopers? We can come back to you, Virgil. No, I would just like to say thanks again to the Film Society at Lincoln Center for inviting us to do this. This was something of a dream of mine, to like pick a movie and screen it at Lincoln Center. I'm so glad we picked Starship Troopers and we were able to enjoy it with you guys tonight.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks for coming.